What would you do if you knocked on the door of your own home and a stranger asked you who you were? What would you do if you looked up the staircase you had climbed 1,000 times as a little girl and saw yourself standing at the top of it, wearing your dress, wearing your mother's necklace, wearing the ring your fiancé had placed on your finger? That is exactly what happened to Charlotte Ashford on a cold October afternoon in the year 1847. And by the time the sun went down that day, Charlotte had lost her name, her home, and the man she was going to marry. But she did not know, no one knew, that one man in England would be able to tell the two identical sisters apart. A man Charlotte had never even met. This is her story. The carriage wheels crunched over the long gravel drive of Ashford Hall, and Charlotte pressed her hand against the cold window glass. 6 months. 6 long months she had been away, nursing her dying aunt in the north. 6 months of sleepless nights, of spoon-feeding broth to a woman who barely knew her own name anymore. And in all that time, only 3 letters had reached her from home. 3 short, strange, cold letters. The last one had broken her heart. It was from the family lawyer, Mr. Grimsby, and it said only this: "Your father passed away on the 4th of September. The funeral has taken place." There was no way to delay it. No way to delay it. Charlotte had read that line 100 times on the journey home. Her father, her kind, gentle father, who used to call her my golden girl, had been put into the ground, and she had not even been there to say goodbye. She had cried until she had no tears left. Now, as the great gray house rose up before her, she felt only a terrible emptiness, and one small, warm thought that kept her going. Edmund. Her fiancé. 3 years they had been engaged. Edmund would hold her. Edmund would help her grieve. And her sister, her twin sister, Cecily, surely Cecily needed her too. They had lost their father. All they had left in the world was each other. The carriage stopped. Charlotte stepped down, her black mourning dress heavy in the autumn wind, and walked to the front door of the house where she had been born. She knocked. The door opened, and a man she had never seen in her life looked down at her. A butler, tall, gray-haired, with cold eyes. "Yes," he said. Charlotte blinked. Where is Hobbs? Where is our butler?" "There is no Hobbs here, madam. May I ask who is calling?" Charlotte almost laughed. She was so tired, so hollow with grief, that for a moment she thought this must be some strange dream. "Who is calling?" she repeated. "I am Charlotte Ashford. This is my home. Please, where is my sister?" Something changed in the butler's face. Not confusion, not surprise. Recognition. As if he had been warned. As if he had been waiting for her. "Wait here," he said, and to Charlotte's astonishment, he began to close the door in her face, the door of her own house, leaving her standing on the step like a beggar. But before the door could shut, a voice floated down from inside. A soft, sweet, familiar voice. The most familiar voice in the world. Her own voice. "Who is it, Marsh?" The door swung wide again, and Charlotte looked up the grand staircase of Ashford Hall and forgot how to breathe. A woman stood at the top of the stairs, one white hand resting on the banister. She wore a gown of deep blue silk, Charlotte's asterisk gown, the one made for her last birthday. Around her neck hung a small golden locket, Charlotte's asterisk locket, her dead mother's locket, the one thing in the world Charlotte treasured most. And on her left hand, catching the gray afternoon light, sparkled a ring of pearls and diamonds. Charlotte knew that ring. She had worn it for 3 years. Edmund had slipped it onto her finger in the rose garden on a June evening, while her father watched from the terrace with tears of joy in his eyes. The woman at the top of the stairs was her twin sister, Cecily. And Cecily was wearing Charlotte's entire life. "Cecily," Charlotte whispered. Then louder, her voice shaking, "Cecily, what is this? Why are you wearing Mother's locket? Why are you wearing my asterisk ring?" Cecily came down the stairs slowly, gracefully, unhurried, and as she came closer, Charlotte saw her sister's face, her own face, arrange itself into an expression of gentle, aching pity. "Oh," Cecily breathed, "oh, my poor darling, you've come back." She turned to the butler, and her eyes filled with perfect, shining tears. "Marsh, this is my sister, my poor troubled sister Cecily." The world tilted under Charlotte's feet. "What did you say?" "The doctors warned us this might happen," Cecily went on, her voice soft with sorrow, speaking to the butler as if Charlotte were not even there. "Our aunt's death was too much for her. Grief can do terrible things to a fragile mind. She believes—" Cecily pressed a trembling hand to her lips as if she could hardly bear to say it. "She believes she is *me*. She believes she is Charlotte." "No," Charlotte said. Her voice came out as a whisper. Then she found the strength her father had always said she carried. "No, I am Charlotte, you know I am. Cecily, look at me. I held your hand when Mother died. I sat with you all night. You cried into my shoulder until morning. How can you do this?" For just a moment, half a second, no more, something flickered behind Cecily's eyes. Something cold and satisfied, like a cat watching a bird with a broken wing. Then it was gone, hidden again behind those beautiful false tears. "You see, Marsh," Cecily murmured, "you see how ill she is." Charlotte looked around wildly. "Where is Mrs. Finch? Where is Annie? Where is old Peter from the stables? They know me, call them, any of them, they've known us since we were children." "The old staff have been let go," Cecily said smoothly. "After Father died, the house needed a fresh beginning. Everyone here is new. Everyone here is new." The words fell on Charlotte like stones. Every single servant who could tell the twins apart, everyone who knew that Charlotte had a small scar on her wrist from falling out of the apple tree, everyone who knew that Cecily was the one who took sugar in her tea, every one of them was gone. There was no one left in Ashford Hall who knew her. No one but the sister who was stealing her life. "Edmund," Charlotte gasped, "Edmund will know me. The moment he sees us together, he will know." "Edmund," Cecily said gently, "is my fiancé, darling. We are to be married in the spring." She twisted the pearl ring slowly around her finger, and this time she did not bother to hide the small smile at the corner of her mouth. "Marsh, my sister is not well and the cold air is bad for her. Give her some coins for the coaching in." She turned away. "There is a good asylum near Harrogate, I'm told. Perhaps when she is calmer we shall write to them." "Cecily," Charlotte lunged forward, but the butler's heavy arm blocked the doorway. "Cecily, please, I am your sister *. Cecily paused on the bottom stair. She looked back over her shoulder, and for the first time she let Charlotte see the truth in her eyes, cold, clear, and utterly without mercy. Then the great oak door of Ashford Hall swung shut, and Charlotte heard the iron bolt slide home. She stood alone in the wind in her black mourning dress on the doorstep of the house where she had been born, with no father, no home, no name, and 3 coins in her hand like a beggar woman. And behind the closed door, Cecily Ashford climbed the stairs of her stolen kingdom, lifted her sister's ring to her lips, and kissed it. "Now," she whispered, "everything is mine." But Cecily had made one mistake, one small mistake she knew nothing about. Because 7 miles away, in a great house called Weston Park, there lived a man who had met the Ashford twins once, only once, many years ago, on a single summer afternoon. A man who was now the most powerful duke in the county. And he was the only person alive who could tell them apart. The Crown and Rose was the cheapest inn in the village of Ashford Green, and even so, Charlotte could barely afford it. She sat on the edge of a narrow bed in a cold little room under the roof and counted her money for the 3rd time. The 3 coins her own butler had pressed into her hand, charity, from her own house, and the few shillings left over from her journey. Enough for 4 nights. Maybe 5 if she did not eat much. 5 nights and then nothing. Outside the small window, the lights of Ashford Hall glowed on the hill like a crown of candles. Somewhere behind those windows, her sister was sleeping in Charlotte's bed, under Charlotte's roof, wearing Charlotte's ring. Why? That was the question that burned in her all night. Not just how but why. They had grown up sharing everything. One face, one nursery, one mother lost too young and one father who had loved them both. Or had he? Charlotte pushed the thought away. She could not afford tears tonight. She needed to think. And so, by the light of a single candle, Charlotte did what her father had taught her to do whenever the world became frightening. When you are lost, my golden girl, do not weep at the whole forest. Look at one tree at a time. She spread out her letters on the bed, every letter she had received in the 6 months she had been away. And slowly, one tree at a time, the whole terrible forest came into view. The first letter, the one that had started everything, had arrived in April. It was signed by her aunt's housekeeper. Your aunt is gravely ill. The doctors fear the worst. She is asking for you. Please come at once and plan to stay some months. Charlotte had packed within a day. Of course she had. That was who she was. But now she remembered what she had found at the end of that long journey north. Her aunt, pale and thin, yes, but sitting up in her chair by the fire, surprised, almost embarrassed. Gravely ill. Who told you that, child? I've had my winter cough, nothing more. At the time, Charlotte had thought the housekeeper had simply panicked and exaggerated. She had stayed anyway because 2 weeks after she arrived, her aunt truly did fall ill. Suddenly, violently, as if fate itself had decided to make the lie come true. Charlotte stared at the letter in her trembling hands, and a cold thought crawled up her spine like a spider. She carried the candle closer. She knew her aunt's housekeeper's writing, round, careful, old-fashioned letters. She had seen it on every jar of preserves in her aunt's pantry. This writing was different, elegant, slanted, beautiful even. The letter was a forgery. Someone had written it to lure her away. Someone had known her well enough to know she would go, that gentle, dutiful Charlotte would drop everything and travel 200 miles for a sick old woman without asking a single question. Someone had needed her far from home, for a long, long time. And while she was gone, her father had died, the servants had been dismissed, and her sister had slipped into her life like a hand into a glove. Charlotte sat very still in the cold little room. She was no longer crying. Something else was growing in her chest now, something she had rarely felt in her gentle life. Anger. You planned it, she whispered to the candle flame. You planned all of it. But planning a thing like this, the letters, the timing, the servants, it was too big, too careful. And there was one piece Charlotte could not make fit. The letter announcing her father's death had come after the funeral. Someone had made sure she could not come home in time. Someone with authority. Someone the whole world would trust. She needed help. She needed someone who knew her, truly knew her. And there was only one person left. Edmund. Edmund Blake lived at Fairview, a handsome white house 3 miles from the village. Charlotte walked there the next morning through the wet fields because she could not spare money for a cart. By the time she reached his gate, the hem of her black dress was heavy with mud, and strands of hair hung loose around her face. She knew how she looked. She did not care. 3 years of engagement. He had held her hands in the rose garden and promised her forever. He knew the sound of her laugh. He knew she was afraid of thunderstorms. He knew her, not her face, her asterisk. The moment he saw her, the moment he heard her voice, this nightmare would crack open like an egg. She rang the bell. Edmund himself opened the door, tall, golden-haired, handsome as a painting. And when his eyes fell on Charlotte, his face went white as chalk. "Good God," he breathed. "Edmund," her voice broke with relief. "Edmund, thank heaven. Something terrible has happened you cannot imagine. I hardly know how to say it." "Cecily," he said the name carefully, softly, the way one speaks to a frightened horse. "Cecily, you should not be here." The world stopped. "What did you call me?" "Your sister told me you might come." His voice was full of pity, and the pity was worse than a slap. "She told me about your condition. That poor Cecily believes she is Charlotte, that the grief has confused you." "Edmund," Charlotte stepped toward him, and he actually stepped back. "Edmund, look at me. It's me. It's Lottie. You proposed to me in the rose garden. It was June. You were so nervous you dropped the ring in the grass, and we searched for it on our knees, both of us laughing. Edmund, you know me. For a moment, one terrible, hopeful moment, he hesitated. His eyes searched her face, her eyes, her mouth. And Charlotte watched, with a horror she would remember for the rest of her life, as the man she had loved for 3 years looked directly at her. And did not know her. "Cecily could know all those stories," he said quietly. "Twins share everything. Charlotte told me you two even fooled your own governess when you were girls." He shook his head slowly. "I'm sorry. I am truly sorry, but I cannot tell you apart. No one can. I have to trust the sister who was here, not the one who appeared out of nowhere with mud on her dress, telling wild tales." "The one who was here," Charlotte repeated numbly. "Edmund, how long was she here, playing me while I was away?" He didn't answer, but his eyes flickered, guilty, uncertain, and that flicker told Charlotte something that turned her blood to ice. Cecily had not waited for their father to die to begin. She had been Charlotte visiting Edmund, walking with Edmund, laughing with Edmund for months, perhaps from the very week Charlotte left. And Edmund, her Edmund, had never noticed the difference. Because the terrible truth, the truth Charlotte could not yet bear to look at, was this: a man who truly loves a woman does not lose her among 1,000 faces, let alone 2. "Please leave," Edmund said, not unkindly. "If you go quietly, I won't tell anyone you came." The door began to close, and in the hallway behind him, Charlotte heard footsteps on the stairs, light, graceful, familiar footsteps, and then a voice, her own sweet voice, calling out from inside the house that should have been Charlotte's future. "Edmund, darling," who was at the door? She was there. She was already there in his house at 10 o'clock in the morning. "No one, my love," Edmund called back. "A traveler lost." "Well, come back to breakfast. I have wonderful news," Cecily's voice sang, bright as silver bells. "I spoke to the vicar yesterday. Why should we wait until spring? Let's move the wedding forward, my darling. Let's be married this month." The door clicked shut. Charlotte stood on the steps of Fairview, in the pale morning light, and understood at last that no one in the world was coming to save her. She would have to save herself. She turned and walked back down the muddy road, penniless, homeless, nameless, while behind her in the warm house, her sister planned a wedding in her name. But Charlotte Ashford was walking, though she did not know it, straight toward the one road that would change everything. Because on that road, 7 miles away, a black carriage with a silver crest was already rolling through the rain. There was one door left in the world that might still open for Charlotte Ashford. Mr. Grimsby, her father's lawyer for 30 years, the quiet little man with ink-stained fingers who had come to Ashford Hall every Christmas, who had watched the twins grow up, who had held the family's every secret in his careful hands. Grimsby had written the letter about her father's funeral. Grimsby had signed the papers. If anyone knew what had truly happened in that house while Charlotte was away, it was him. His office was in Milbourne, the market town, 9 miles away. Charlotte had 2 shillings left. The inn was paid until tomorrow, and 2 shillings would not buy a seat on any coach. So on that gray, wind-bitten morning, she wrapped her thin black shawl around her shoulders and she began to walk. The first hour was not so bad. By the second hour, her shoes, pretty London shoes, made for garden parties, not for country roads, had begun to come apart at the seams. And by the third hour, the sky opened. It was the kind of rain that does not fall but attacks cold, hard, endless October rain. Within minutes, Charlotte was soaked to the skin. Her black dress clung to her like a drowned thing. Water ran from her hair down her neck into her broken shoes. Farm carts passed her and the drivers looked away because a woman walking alone in the rain in mud-heavy clothes was not a lady. She was a beggar, a vagrant, nobody. This is what she wanted, Charlotte thought, putting one foot in front of the other. This is exactly what Cecily wanted the world to see, not a stolen sister, a mad woman in the rain. And the most frightening part, the part that made her cold beyond the reach of any rain, was this: it was working. Even Charlotte was beginning to feel like nobody. When you lose your home, your name, your face, how long before you lose yourself? She was so deep in that dark thought that she did not hear the carriage until it was almost beside her. It came out of the rain like something from another world, huge, black, gleaming, drawn by 4 gray horses, with a silver crest on its door. Charlotte stepped off the road to let it pass, keeping her eyes down, the way nobody learns to do. The carriage did not pass. It slowed and stopped. The door opened, and a man leaned out into the rain. He was perhaps 30, dark-haired, with a face that seemed carved rather than born, hard jaw, straight brows, and gray eyes the exact color of the storm. He was, without question, the most striking man Charlotte had ever seen. He was also, at that moment, staring at her with an intensity that was almost improper. Not the way men sometimes stared at a pretty face. No, he was staring the way a man stares at a ghost. "You," he said. His voice was low, rough at the edges. "Stand still a moment." Charlotte's whole body tensed. A lone woman, an empty road, a strange man. "Sir, I want no trouble." "Look at me." And something in his voice, not a command exactly, but an asterisk urgency, made her lift her chin and look him full in the face, with the rain running down her cheeks like tears. The man's gray eyes moved over her slowly, her eyes, her mouth, and then strangely, so strangely, her hands, as if hands could tell him something faces could not. Then he said the words that no butler, no servant, no vicar, not even the man who had promised to marry her, had been willing to say. "You are Charlotte Ashford." The rain kept falling. The horses stamped in the mud, and Charlotte stood in the middle of the ruined road and burst into tears. Not gentle, ladylike tears, great, ugly, gasping sobs, the kind that had been locked inside her since the door of her own house was bolted against her. Because that was all it took in the end. After everything, after Cecily, after the servants, after Edmund's blank, pitying stare, all it took to break her heart open was one stranger in the rain saying her own name back to her. How she choked. "How can you possibly, even mine, no one can tell us apart. No one, who are you?" The man watched her cry, and something flickered across that carved face, something that looked almost like pain, quickly hidden. "My name is Nathaniel," he said, "Weston." Charlotte's breath caught. Everyone in the county knew that name. The new Duke of Weston, master of Weston Park, its forests, its farms, its endless money. The recluse Duke, the cold Duke, the Duke who had appeared from nowhere 2 years ago when his uncle and cousin died, who attended no balls, hosted no hunts, and had, so the gossips complained bitterly, never once smiled in public. And this man, this famous stranger, had recognized her in the rain when her own fiancé could not recognize her in daylight. "Your Grace." She wiped her face uselessly with a soaked glove, suddenly aware that she was speaking to a duke while looking like something the river had thrown up. "Forgive me. You say my name as if you know me, but I swear we have never met." "We have," said the duke. "You don't remember. There is no reason you should." And then, before she could ask the 100 questions rising in her, he pushed the carriage door wide. "You are going to Milbourne, to Grimsby's office." Charlotte went very still. "How could you know that?" "Because it is the only sensible move you have left, and I suspect you are a sensible woman. Get in." "Your Grace, I cannot possibly." "You can," he said flatly. "Or you can walk 6 more miles in broken shoes, catch a fever and die politely in a ditch, which would please your sister enormously." Charlotte's mouth fell open. You know about Cecily, about what she—" "Get in, Miss Ashford," said the Duke of Weston, and moved to make room. "It seems we have a great deal to talk about." Charlotte Ashford had been raised to be careful, to never ride alone with a strange man, to never trust too quickly. But she looked at that open door, and she thought, "Every person I was taught to trust has abandoned me. Perhaps it is time to trust a stranger who stared at me in the rain and saw me." She climbed in. The carriage rolled forward, wheels hissing through the wet. Inside, wrapped in a dry traveling rug that smelled of cedar, Charlotte finally asked the question burning inside her. "Your Grace, how did you know me? How, when my own people cannot?" The Duke looked out at the rain for a long moment, and when he answered, he did not really answer at all. "Your sister looks at people," he said quietly, "and calculates what she can take from them. You look at people and wonder what you can give. It has always been in your eyes, even years ago. Even today, half drowned on a road, you stepped aside to let my carriage pass." He turned those storm-gray eyes on her. "Faces can be identical, Miss Ashford. Eyes never are." Charlotte stared at him, this cold, unsmiling man the whole county feared, and felt, for the first time in days, that she was not alone in the world. What she did not see, when the carriage stopped at the George Inn in Milbourne and the Duke gave quiet instructions for a room, a fire, and a hot meal to be put in her name, her real name, was the moment he stepped back out to his coachman. What she did not hear was what the Duke of Weston murmured, low and grim, with the rain dripping from the brim of his hat. "Stay near the inn tonight. Watch her door. Tell Hopkins to take the second watch." The coachman blinked. "Is the lady in danger, Your Grace?" The Duke looked up through the rain, toward the dark hills where Ashford Hall lay hidden behind its old trees. "Her sister has spent months building a perfect lie," he said, "and this girl is the only living proof against it. If Cecily Ashford learns where her sister is sleeping tonight—" he paused, and his jaw tightened, "I do not believe she will stop at asylums." He knew something more than eyes and rain and summer memories. But that is the next part of the story. Charlotte woke the next morning in a warm bed, in a clean room, to the smell of fresh bread rising from the kitchen of the George Inn, and for 3 beautiful seconds she forgot. Then she remembered everything, and the weight came down on her chest like a stone. But the world had changed a little overnight. There was a fire in her grate. There were dry clothes laid over the chair, plain, respectable, warm clothes in her size. And when she came downstairs, the innkeeper's wife curtsied and said words Charlotte thought she might never hear again. "Good morning, Miss Ashford. His Grace is waiting in the private parlor." Miss Ashford, her own name in someone else's mouth, offered as simply as bread. Charlotte had to stop on the stairs and press her hand to the wall. The Duke of Weston was standing by the parlor window, watching the market square, dressed in black like a crow among the morning crowds. A breakfast was laid, eggs, ham, tea, and he nodded at it without ceremony. "Eat all of it. You've been living on tea and pride for 3 days." "Your Grace." Eat first, then we talk. So she ate, and heaven forgive her, she ate like a farmhand, while the most feared man in the county stood at the window and said nothing at all, and somehow the silence was not uncomfortable. It was the first safe silence Charlotte had known since she came home. When the plates were empty, the Duke sat down across from her, folded his hands and said, "Grimsby is not in Milbourne. His clerk says he left for London a week ago. No word of when he returns." Charlotte's heart sank. "A week ago, right before I came home, Your Grace, every person who could help me is either dismissed or vanished, or—" She stopped. "You said yesterday that we had met before. I have thought, and I cannot find you anywhere in my memory, and a man like you is not easy to forget." Something almost like a smile touched the corner of the Duke's mouth. "Almost. You wound me, Miss Ashford, but you are honest, which I prefer." He looked into the fire. "It was not a man like me you met. It was a boy. 11 years ago at the summer fair at Milbourne. You would have been 12 years old." "The summer fair," Charlotte frowned. "We went every year father took us." "I know, I watched you arrive. Everyone did, the Ashford twins in their white dresses, two little mirror-image princesses. And I—" He paused, and his jaw worked, as if the words were rusty from lack of use. "I was the boy holding the horses." Charlotte blinked. "The horses?" "My branch of the family had the Weston name and nothing else. My father gambled away what little we had, then drank away the rest. That summer I was 20 years old, and my grand cousins would toss me a coin to mind their horses at the fair, the way one pays a stable boy. I wore my father's old coat cut down. Badly." His voice was flat, factual, but Charlotte, who had learned this week what humiliation tastes like, heard everything underneath it. "There was a trick rider and a crowd, and someone's dog spooked the horses. I was dragged through the mud in front of half the county. And when I got up, mud from hair to boots, one sleeve torn off my father's coat, the first sound I heard was laughter." He looked at her. It was a girl in a white dress. She laughed, and she pointed, and she said loudly so everyone could enjoy it, "Look, the stable boy is wearing a gentleman's coat, and the coat is trying to escape." And the whole crowd laughed with her. They always laugh with people like her. It costs nothing. Charlotte's hand had risen slowly to her mouth. "Cecily." "I didn't know her name then. I only knew there were two of you because while the crowd was still laughing, the other girl in the white dress came out of it. She crossed all that mud in her little satin shoes. She picked my cap out of a puddle, and she cleaned it against her own white dress, ruined it. A dress worth more than everything I owned, and she handed it back to me, and she said—" The Duke stopped. 11 years, and he still had to stop. "She said, 'It's a very fine coat. My father says only small people laugh at big misfortunes. I hope your day mends, sir.'" He straightened. "Sir, I was a mud-soaked stable boy, and a 12-year-old girl called me sir, the first person in my life who ever did." The fire crackled. Charlotte sat frozen, searching, a fair, a fallen boy, a wet cap, and found almost nothing. The faintest ghost of a memory, no more. "Your Grace, I barely remember it. I'm ashamed to say it, but it's true." "Of course you don't remember." He said it without bitterness, with something else, something warmer and heavier. "That is precisely the point, Miss Ashford. Your sister's cruelty was a performance she'll remember forever. She works at cruelty. Your kindness cost you nothing to give and nothing to keep. You threw it away like a penny." He held her gaze. "I have spent 11 years learning what people are. And I will tell you what I learned that day and never forgot. Your sister looks at people and calculates what she can take. You look at people and wonder what you can give. Identical faces. Opposite souls. I knew you on that road yesterday in half a heartbeat, and I would know you among 1,000 sisters." Charlotte looked down at her hands, and her eyes were burning. Her whole life, people had asked how does anyone tell the twins apart? And it had taken a ruined boy from a summer fair to give the answer. "So now you understand why I stopped my carriage," the Duke said, rising, "and why you will not be fighting this war alone. My aunt, Lady Margaret, keeps house at Weston Park. You'll stay under her wing properly, respectably, everything in order. And then, Miss Ashford, we are going to take your life back, piece by piece." But 7 miles away, in the stolen halls of Ashford Hall, the war had already begun. Because a fishmonger's boy in Milbourne had seen a black-haired woman in mourning climb into the Weston carriage. And the fishmonger's boy told the cook, and the cook told a footman, and by nightfall, the story had climbed the hill and slipped through the servants' door of Ashford Hall like a rat. Cecily Ashford was at her dressing table, Charlotte's dressing table, when her new maid whispered the news. In the mirror, her lovely face did not move at all. That was the frightening thing about Cecily. Her rages were silent. "The Duke of Weston," she said softly, "the recluse, the one nobody knows." She set down the silver hairbrush with a small, precise click. Why would a duke stop for a madwoman in the rain? She sat very still for a long moment. Then she opened the writing desk, took out paper, and began composing a letter in her elegant, slanted hand, the same hand that had once written of a dying aunt. The letter was addressed to Dr. Josiah Prout of the Harrogate Asylum, a private institution, expensive and discreet, known for asking few questions of families who paid well. "Dear Doctor*", she wrote, "it is with a heavy heart that I must ask you to act at last. My poor sister's delusions have grown violent. She now imposes herself upon strangers of rank, telling her wild story. Before she does harm to herself or to me, she must be secured." And on the second page for the doctor's men she wrote a description: height, coloring, the black mourning dress, the small scar on the left wrist from the apple tree all those years ago. Her own sister's body, written out like a wanted poster. Cecily sealed the letter with black wax and smiled at herself in her sister's mirror. "Run to your Duke, Lottie," she whispered. "Even a duke cannot argue with a doctor's signature." Weston Park was the grandest house Charlotte had ever entered, and the emptiest. Marble floors that echoed, long galleries of paintings nobody looked at, 60 rooms and one man living in perhaps 3 of them. The Duke's aunt, Lady Margaret, turned out to be a small, round, sharp-eyed widow who took one look at Charlotte and declared, "Good heavens, Nathaniel, she's soaked through to the soul. Wars are fought after breakfast, child, not before. Come with me." Lady Margaret asked no questions that first night. She simply put Charlotte in a warm room, sat with her until she stopped shaking, and said only one thing before blowing out the candle. "My nephew has not brought a guest to this house in 2 years. Whoever you are, my dear, you matter." But by morning, the War Council had begun. "Let us look at this squarely," the Duke said, pacing the library while rain streaked the tall windows. "Your sister holds the house, the money, the servants, and forgive me, your face. Your word against hers is worth nothing. She has spent months telling the county that poor Cecily is mad, so every word you speak sounds like proof of her story. It's clever, it's watertight." He stopped. "So we do not attack the lie, we attack the foundation asterisk. We find someone whose word the world must accept, someone who can tell you apart and cannot be dismissed." "There is no such person," Charlotte said quietly. "There never has been, only—" She stopped. Her heart stumbled. "Only—" "Nanny Hale." The name came out of Charlotte like a prayer. "She nursed us from the day we were born. Mother died when we were 8, and after that Nanny was our mother. She could tell us apart in the dark by our breathing. She never missed, not once in 20 years. Charlotte's eyes widened. "Your Grace, Nanny was still at the hall when I left in April. She was to keep house while I was away, but when I came back—" "Let me guess," the Duke said grimly. "The old staff have been let go." Cecily would never dare simply throw her out. The whole village loves Nanny Hale. But if she was retired, pensioned off somewhere quiet, far away. The The Duke was already ringing the bell. Then we find out where, today. It took his men 2 days. 2 days in which Charlotte barely slept, in which every carriage on the drive made her heart lurch, and then on the 3rd morning word came. Martha Hale, formerly of Ashford Hall, was living with her widowed sister in Nethercombe, a village nearly 40 miles south. She had been sent there in September, 1 week after Charlotte's father died. 1 week. Cecily had removed her mother's eyes before stealing her sister's face. Nethercombe was a huddle of stone cottages around a grey little church. The Duke's carriage, deliberately plain today, no crest, stopped at the last cottage on the lane, where washing hung limp in the damp air. Charlotte was out the door before the wheels stopped turning. "Nanny," she knocked breathless. "Nanny, it's me." The door opened 3 inches, and there she was, older, smaller, grayer, but her. The round face, the flour-dusted apron, the eyes that had watched over 10,000 childhood nights. Those eyes took one look at Charlotte and went wide with something that broke Charlotte's heart. Not joy. Terror. "No," the old woman whispered. "No, no, you mustn't be here," and she tried to shut the door. The Duke's boot stopped it gently but absolutely. "Mrs. Hale," he said in a voice made for calming spooked horses, "no harm will come to you. I give you my word, but you know who this is. Say her name." The old woman's chin trembled. Her eyes went from the Duke to Charlotte, up and down, the old measuring look, the look that had never once been wrong, and 2 tears ran down into the creases of her face. "Lottie," she breathed, "my Lottie lamb, oh my darling girl, what has she done?" And then Charlotte was inside, in the smell of bread and lavender water, being held and rocked by the arms that had held her before anyone else's, and both of them were crying. And for a moment there was no plot, no Duke, no stolen name. Only a child found again. But when the tears eased and the tea was poured, Nanny Hale's hands would not stop shaking. "I can't help you," she said, staring into her cup. "God forgive me, I can't." "Nanny, you don't understand what she is." The cup rattled down. "That last week after your poor father passed, God rest him, she came to my room at night. Sweet as cream she was. Said my service was done, that I'd have my pension and a nice cottage far away. And when I said I'd not leave till Miss Charlotte came home," the old woman's voice dropped to a whisper. "She sat on the edge of my bed and she smiled and she said, 'Nanny dear, the silver has been counted and some of it is missing. It would be a terrible thing if it were found in an old servant's trunk. Old thieves die in prison, Nanny. Old women who take their pensions and hold their tongues die in feather beds.'" Silence filled the little kitchen. Charlotte felt sick. The Duke's face might have been cut from stone. "She'd have done it," Nanny whispered. "Planted it herself with her own white hands. I've known that child since she was an hour old, and I'll tell you what I never dared tell your sainted father. There's a room in Cecily where a heart should be, and it's been empty since the day she was born, and nothing your poor mother or father ever did could furnish it." "Nanny," Charlotte knelt and took the shaking old hands in hers. "My father, did he know? Did he see what she was?" The old woman went very still. And then Martha Hale looked up, and in her wet eyes there was something new, something that made even the Duke lean forward. "No," she said softly. "Child, your father knew everything. Why do you think the money was never put in Cecily's hands? Why do you think he grew so quiet that last year? He watched her. He wrote letters late into the night and burned the copies. And 3 days before he died, her grip tightened on Charlotte's fingers until it hurt. He called me to his study alone. He looked 20 years older than his age, my poor master. And he said to me, 'Martha, if anything should happen, if my girls should ever stand against each other, remember this and tell Charlotte. There is a letter with Grimsby. It is to be opened only when both of my daughters are in the same room. Both of them, Martha. That is the lock, and that is the key.'" Charlotte's heart was pounding. A letter saying what? He never told me. He only said, the old woman swallowed. He said, "It will give the right daughter everything, and God forgive me for what it will do to the other." The Duke was on his feet. Grimsby. Everything runs through Grimsby, the funeral, the will, and now this. He turned to Charlotte, and for the first time since she had met him, there was open urgency in the storm-gray eyes. His clerk said London, but a letter like that would never travel. It lives in his strong room in Milbourne. We go back. Tonight. They drove through the dark, the plain carriage swaying, Nanny Hale's blessing still warm on Charlotte's forehead. Hope, real hope, with edges and weight, sat in Charlotte's chest for the first time since the door of Ashford Hall had closed on her. Both daughters in the same room. That is the lock and that is the key. Her father had not abandoned her. Her father had seen asterisk. Even from the grave, her father was reaching out his hand. They smelled it before they saw it. Smoke, bitter and wet, hanging over the rooftops of Milbourne like a shroud. The carriage turned into Chandler Lane, and the horses shied, and Charlotte looked out the window, and her new, fragile hope cracked down the middle. Grimsby's office was gone. Blackened beams jutted into the night sky like burnt bones. The strong room's iron door hung open, warped by heat, gaping at nothing. Neighbors stood in the lane in their nightclothes, murmuring, and a constable held a lantern up to what remained of 30 years of the county's secrets, deeds, wills, letters, all of it ash, still breathing little red sparks into the dark. Started around midnight, the constable was telling someone. Whole thing went up like straw, queer though, he lowered his voice. Old Grimsby's clerk swears the strong room was locked and empty of any lamp or coal, and nobody's seen Mr. Grimsby himself in a fortnight, not in London, not anywhere. It's as if the gentleman has vanished off the face of the earth. Charlotte stood in the smoky lane, staring at the grave of her father's last letter. Cecily was not just ahead of them. Cecily was ahead of them everywhere. And somewhere in the crowd of nightclothes and lantern light, a man in a brown coat watched the black-haired woman and the tall Duke for a long, careful moment, then slipped away into the dark, riding north, toward Ashford Hall. The envelope arrived at Weston Park on a silver tray, 3 days after the fire, addressed in an elegant, slanted hand that Charlotte now knew better than her own. Heavy cream paper, a black wax seal pressed with the Ashford crest. The Duke slid it open at the breakfast table, read it once, and went so still that Lady Margaret lowered her teacup. "Nathaniel, what is it?" He did not answer. He simply turned the card around and laid it in front of Charlotte, face up, and Charlotte looked down at the gold-edged invitation and felt the room tilt. "Mr. Edmund Blake requests the honor of your presence at his marriage to Miss Charlotte Ashford at the chapel of Ashford Hall on Saturday the 30th of October at 11 o'clock in the morning." Her own name, her own chapel where she had been christened, where her mother lay under the cold stones by the altar, her own wedding. And she was not the bride. "She sent it here," Charlotte whispered. "To you asterisk, she knows I would see it. Why would she, why on earth would she?" "Because it isn't an invitation," the Duke said quietly. "It's a declaration of victory. She is standing on the hill with your life in her hands, waving it at us." He tapped the card once. "And she is telling us something else if we have the wit to hear it. Look at the name again." "I can't bear to look at it." "Look anyway. Miss Charlotte Ashford, not Cecily. From the very first hour she did not merely take your house and your fiancé, she took your asterisk name asterisk and gave you hers. Have you never asked yourself why? If she only wanted Edmund, she could have charmed him as herself. If she only wanted the hall, she lived there already. Why steal the name?" Charlotte shook her head slowly. "The will," said the Duke. "Nanny Hale told us your father never trusted money into Cecily's hands. I would wager everything I own that when his will was read, Ashford Hall and every shilling of the fortune was left to one daughter alone, to Charlotte. He leaned forward. Your sister could not inherit as Cecily, so she made sure that when the lawyers asked for Charlotte Ashford stepped forward. The theft of your name was not spite. It was the entire crime. Everything else, the forged letter, the dismissed servants, the mad sister story, was built to protect that one lie. The logic of it was so cold, so complete, that Charlotte felt it like frost spreading through her chest. 6 months of planning, a dying aunt invented, a father's grave barely settled. All of it, for the moment a lawyer said asterisk to my daughter Charlotte and the wrong twin curtsied. And now the wedding, the Duke went on. Do you know what happens under law on the 30th of October? The moment the ring is on her finger, the Ashford fortune passes into Edmund Blake's control, every acre, every pound. The lie stops being your sister's. It becomes her husband's property, wrapped in the marriage laws of England, defended by every court in the land. Untangling it after that would take 10 years and a miracle. He stood and walked to the window. She is not just celebrating Miss Ashford. She is locking the door behind her. We have 11 days. Then we must stop the wedding. No. The Duke turned, and there was something in his face Charlotte had not seen before, the look, she would think later, of a man who had been planning a battle all his life without knowing it. We must not stop it. We must attend it. Lady Margaret made a small sound of alarm. Charlotte simply stared. Attend it, Your Grace, have you gone mad? Think, he said. Your father's letter told us the terms, both daughters in the same room. The letter is ash, but the principle stands because your father understood something we have been too frightened to use. Apart, you are invisible. She is the lady on the hill and you are the mad woman in the rain. But together, side by side, face to face, before witnesses, the lie has to work in the open. Every guest at that wedding will look from one identical face to the other, and be forced to ask the question your sister has spent 6 months making sure nobody asks. Which one is which? And they will answer it wrongly. Charlotte was on her feet now. Your Grace, you don't understand what you're asking. I walk into that chapel and Cecily lifts one trembling hand and says, my poor sister has escaped her keepers. And the whole county will carry me out in pity while she weeps prettily at the altar. There are papers, Nanny warned us. A doctor bought and paid for, they will take me, and this time no carriage will stop in the rain. They will not take you, the Duke said, because you will not walk in as a mad woman. You will walk in on the arm of the Duke of Weston. The room went silent. There are perhaps 3 men in England who could stand beside you and change the arithmetic of that room, and I am one of them. Let her call the Duke of Weston's companion a lunatic in front of 200 guests. Let her explain why a man of my rank, my fortune, and my famously unsociable habits has taken up the cause of a stranger. I do not need the room to believe you, Charlotte. It was the first time he had used her name, only her name, and it landed somewhere under her heart. Belief takes months. I only need the room to doubt loudly, publicly, in front of the vicar, the lawyers, and God. Doubt stops weddings. Doubt reopens wills. Doubt is a crack in the dam, and behind the dam is the truth, and the truth is heavier than she is. Charlotte looked at this man, this cold, unsmiling recluse who had rebuilt himself from a mud-soaked boy into a fortress, and who was now calmly offering to tear a hole in his own walls for her. And she found her hands had stopped shaking. 11 days, she said. 11 days, said the Duke, and I will spend 8 of them in London. London. Grimsby is alive. I feel it in my bones. Dead men are found, Miss Ashford. Frightened men vanish, and a frightened man who kept 30 years of secrets does not vanish empty-handed. If your father's letter has a twin of its own, a copy, a draft, anything, it is wherever Grimsby is hiding. I will find him and I will bring him back, and we will not walk into that chapel armed only with doubt. He paused at the door. My aunt will guard you like a dragon. My men will watch every road. Do not leave Weston Park, not for anything, not for anyone, until I come for you myself. Give me your word. You have it, Charlotte said. She would have 11 days to regret how easily she gave it. The morning of the 30th of October dawned gold and merciless, perfect wedding weather, and the Duke of Weston had not come back. No letter in a week, no word from London. Lady Margaret paced the hall in her church-going best, muttering about nephews and gallows, while the clock crawled toward 10 and Charlotte stood at the window in a borrowed blue gown, watching the empty drive until her eyes ached. At 9:30, a writer came instead. The note he carried was short, written in a hurried, forward-slanting hand, sealed with the Weston crest. Found what we sought. No time to come round by the park. Meet me at the crossroads by Milbourne. We go to the chapel together as promised. Bring my aunt. W. That's his seal, Lady Margaret said, turning it in the light. That's his ring, sure enough. But her old eyes were uneasy, though it's not like Nathaniel to change a plan. There's no time, Charlotte said. The clock stood at 20 to 10. The wedding was at 11. 11 days of waiting had burned down to this one gold morning, and her whole life lay on the other side of it. He said he would come for me, and he has sent for me. It's the same thing. It was not the same thing. They knew it the moment the carriage swung round the bend before the crossroads and found the road blocked. A heavy black coach stood sideways across the lane, its windows barred with iron. 4 men waited beside it, big, patient men in brown coats, and in front of them stood a thin gentleman in respectable gray, holding a leather folder, smiling the mild, immovable smile of a man with the law in his pocket. "Good morning," said Dr. Josiah Prout of the Harrogate Asylum, opening his folder as the Duke's coachman was dragged from the box. Papers of committal, signed and witnessed, all quite in order. He looked up, directly into Charlotte's white face, and read out the name her sister had given her like a brand. "Cecily Ashford, you will come with us now." They took her in the gold October sunlight, on a public road, with the law smiling in their hands. Lady Margaret fought like a lioness. Charlotte would remember that always. The little round woman planted herself between Charlotte and the barred coach and threatened Dr. Prout with magistrates, with bishops, with her nephew, with the wrath of God. But Dr. Prout only kept smiling his mild gray smile and holding out his mild gray papers. Signed by the patient's own sister, witnessed by the family's man of business, my lady. All quite legal. Obstruct us, and I shall be forced to note that the patient has confederates who encourage her delusion. Confederates. One word, and even a duke's aunt became part of the madness. That was the genius of Cecily's cage. Every hand raised to help Charlotte became another bar of it. The last thing Charlotte saw, as the iron-barred coach pulled away, was Lady Margaret standing alone at the crossroads in her church-going best, already turning, already running for the carriage, shouting at the coachman to ride for London, ride for Nathaniel, ride. Then the road bent, and there was nothing but bars and sky. The Harrogate Asylum was not a dungeon. In some ways, that made it worse. It was a great gray house behind a great gray wall, with clean floors and locked doors and windows exactly too small to climb through. The women there wore gray wool dresses, all alike. They ate at long tables, all alike. And the terrible, patient machinery of the place was built on a single rule that Charlotte discovered within the first hour. Whatever you said was a symptom. I am not Cecily Ashford, I am Charlotte. The patient persists in her delusion. My sister has stolen my name. If you write to Nanny Hale in Nethercombe, to Lady Margaret at Weston Park. The patient has woven prominent persons into her fantasy. Note, delusions of grandeur. I am calm, look at me, I am perfectly calm. The patient shows cunning in mimicking rationality. There was no door in it anywhere. Deny the madness mad, weep mad, stay silent, sullen, brooding mad. On the second day, Charlotte understood with cold clarity why the world called places like this a asterisk living tomb. It was a grave where they buried a name while the body was still walking around. And her name, her real name, was already buried out there, walking around Ashford Hall in silk, planning a wedding. She kept count of the days by scratching a thumbnail line in the soap. 3 days, 5, a week. Every rattle of keys in the corridor made her heart leap Nathaniel, and every time it was only the matron or the doctor or the gray food on the gray tray. He did not come. No letter came, no word, nothing, and Charlotte lay on the narrow bed in the gray dress that was not hers, under the name that was not hers, and the darkest voice she had ever heard rose up inside her own heart and began, softly, to talk. He is a duke, Lottie. You knew him for a fortnight. Did you truly believe a man like that would tear apart England for a girl who once cleaned his cap at a fair? Perhaps he weighed the scandal against the sentiment. Perhaps his lawyers advised him. Perhaps, look at this room, look at these walls. Perhaps this was always how it was going to end. By the 10th day, Charlotte had stopped counting. And on the 12th day, Cecily came. The matron was all curtsies and flutter. Such an honor, Miss Ashford, such sisterly devotion. As she showed the visitor into the small visiting room where Charlotte sat at a scarred table. And there she was, her own face framed in a velvet bonnet glowing above a traveling dress of wine-dark silk. Rich, radiant, free. Might we have a moment alone? Cecily asked the matron, her voice trembling beautifully. She is my only sister. The door clicked shut, and Charlotte watched the performance drain out of that identical face like water from a basin. The trembling stilled, the warmth died, the eyes went flat and bright and curious, and what remained sat down across the table and looked at her the way a collector looks at a pinned butterfly. Gray suits us, Cecily said. Who knew? Why are you here? To see. She said it simply, without shame. I've imagined this room for such a long time, Lottie. I wanted to see if it looked the way I dreamed it. She glanced around at the bare walls, the barred window, and nodded slowly, satisfied. It does. The wedding, Charlotte said. Her voice stayed level. She was learning in this gray place a strength she had never needed before. It didn't happen. Postponed 2 little weeks. Cecily sighed, pulling off her gloves finger by finger. It's your fault, of course. The bride's poor mad sister seized on the very morning of the wedding. One simply can't have the ceremony the same day. It looks heartless. Society adores my grief, by the way. I wore gray to church for you. Everyone said I was a saint. She smiled. 2 weeks, Lottie. Then the ring, then the register, and then every stone and shilling of Ashford belongs to my husband, and there is no key in England that will ever unlock it again. Or you. Nathaniel will come. She hated herself the moment it left her lips, hated handing Cecily the last soft thing she had, and Cecily's eyes lit up like a cat's. Nathaniel asterisk, is it? She breathed, delighted. Oh, Lottie, oh, you poor darling, your duke has been in London for 3 weeks. Do you know what dukes do in London? They remember who they are. His lawyers will have explained it to him by now that the Ashford matter is a bog, that the mad sister story is signed and sealed, that no man of rank profits from wading into another family scandal. He hasn't written, has he? She read the answer in Charlotte's face and leaned back, glowing. No. He hasn't written. And then, because she had won everything else and it still was not enough, Cecily leaned across the scarred table and reached for the last thing Charlotte owned. Do you know what I could never forgive you? Her voice dropped low, and for the first time something real moved under it, something old and black and bottomless. It was never Edmund. It was never even the money. It was Father Asterisk. 23 years in that house, Lottie, and do you know what I was? A copy. The spare. He looked at you and his whole face opened like a window, and he looked at me and asterisk checked asterisk. Every time. One heartbeat of checking to be sure which one he was loving. Her hands had closed into fists on the table, the knuckles white against the wine-dark silk. "Charlotte's heart is gold," he told the vicar once. "I was standing right there in the same room with the same face, and I was invisible, so." She stood, drawing her gloves back on, the mask sliding smoothly home. "Let's see, shall we? Let's see if your golden heart can get you out of asterisk here." She rapped on the door for the matron. Charlotte, numb, watched her own face prepare to walk free, and it was in that final moment, as Cecily turned in the doorway to deliver one last look of counterfeit sisterly sorrow, that Charlotte saw it. Her throat, the high lace collar, the velvet ribbon, and no chain beneath. No small gold weight at her breastbone. Their mother's locket was gone. Cecily had worn it in triumph on the staircase that first day, worn it like a scalp. And now, dressed to be seen, dressed for an audience, she had left it off, discarded somewhere in a jewel box at Ashford Hall among the pieces she found dull, because to Cecily it was nothing, an old-fashioned trinket of their mother's. She had stolen it the way she stole everything for the asterisk taking, not the thing itself. She had never even wondered about it. And she should have wondered. Because as the door closed and the key turned, Charlotte sat in the gray room with her heart pounding, hearing, from a distance of 15 years, from a lamplit bedroom, from a mother's lips against her hair on the last night she was well enough to whisper, the words she had carried so long and so deep that she had almost forgotten she carried them. "One day, my Lottie, if you are ever lost, truly lost, so lost that no one in the world knows your face, remember the locket. Remember what I put inside it, and remember what I am about to tell you. Say it back to me now, and then never say it aloud again, not to Papa, not to Nanny, not even to your sister. Especially not to your sister." Charlotte lifted her head in the gray light. Cecily had stolen her name, her home, her fiancé, and her freedom. But their mother, 15 years dead, had hidden one thing in the world where a thief would never look, inside Charlotte herself. And Cecily didn't know. Now it must be told what the Duke of Weston was doing, while Charlotte scratched her days into a bar of grey soap and stopped believing in him. He was tearing London apart with his bare hands. Lady Margaret had reached him on the second night after the ambush, bursting into his rooms with her bonnet crooked and murder in her eyes, and the men who were with the Duke that evening would say afterward that they had finally understood why the whole county was afraid of him. He did not shout. He did not curse. He went white and absolutely still, like the air before lightning, and then he said 4 words. "Then we find Grimsby." For 9 days, no clerk, no banker, no boarding-house keeper in London had any peace. The Duke had begun with one thread. A frightened man does not vanish, he hides, and a hiding man needs money, and money leaves footprints. Grimsby had a widowed sister in Clapham. The sister had lately paid off her grocer's book and bought coal for the whole winter. And in her attic room, behind a locked door, living under the name of Mr. Green, they found him. Josiah Grimsby, her father's lawyer of 30 years, unshaven, trembling, and half dead of shame. The old man wept before the Duke had asked a single question. "I knew," he sobbed. "God help me, your grace, I knew, and I ran. The funeral, she made me delay the letter to the north. She stood in my office in her mourning black and told me her sister was too ill, too fragile asterisk to travel, and I believed her. Why would I not believe her? And then the will was read, and the young lady stood before me and answered to Charlotte, and signed as Charlotte, the same face, the same hand. How was I to asterisk no?" He clutched the Duke's sleeve. "It was only after, small things. She asked me too lightly, too carelessly, whether her father had left any private papers in my keeping, any letters, any instructions." The old man shuddered. "I said no. I lied to her face, and I saw her eyes while I did it, and that night I packed a bag and ran like a thief, because I have buried 3 Ashfords, your grace, and I did not intend to be buried by one." "The letter," the Duke said, "her father's letter. The fire took your strong room. Tell me the fire did not take the letter, or I swear before God." And then Josiah Grimsby, wretched, ruined, terrified Grimsby, said the most beautiful sentence the Duke of Weston had ever heard. "The fire took a asterisk copy asterisk, your grace. Mr. Ashford was not a trusting man, not that last year. The strong room held the decoy. The true packet has lain in a sealed box at his bank in London since the spring, and it opens to 2 signatures, his lawyers." He drew a shaking breath. "And any peer of the realm as witness." 2 hours later, in a paneled room at the bank, a clerk set down a small iron box, and the Duke of Weston broke a dead man's seal. Inside lay 2 things. The first was a letter, many pages, in a firm hand that failed toward the end. The Duke read it once in silence, and Lady Margaret, watching his face, quietly began to cry. "I write this in the full possession of my senses, and in the full breaking of my heart," it began. "I am the father of 2 daughters who share one face. One of them is the finest soul I have ever known. The other has been stealing from me since she was 14 years old." Page after page the dead man testified. The sums that vanished and the servants dismissed for it. The letters in Cecily's elegant, slanted hand that he had intercepted and burned, letters practicing, over and over, her sister's signature. The night he found her standing over his desk with his seal ring in her hand, and the lie she told, smiling, without a heartbeat of hesitation. "I could not send my own child to prison," he wrote, "and I could not warn Charlotte without breaking what is purest in her, her love for her sister. So I did what cowards and fathers do. I built walls of paper. The estate entire to Charlotte. Nothing to Cecily but an allowance under trust. And this letter my last wall, in case the day should come, God forbid it, God forgive me for foreseeing it, when the world can no longer tell my daughters apart." And then, near the end, the words the Duke had crossed England to find. "There is one test that cannot fail and cannot be stolen. My beloved wife, in her last month of life, called Charlotte alone to her bedside. She placed inside her gold locket 2 locks of hair, cut from my daughters' heads on the day they were born, and she whispered to Charlotte certain words, which Charlotte was sworn to repeat to no living soul. My wife would not tell even me what they were. She said only, 'Ask, and the true one will answer.' I enclose, sealed as she sealed it, the paper on which my wife wrote those words with her own dying hand. It has never been opened. Whoever stands before you claiming my daughter's name, ask her what her mother whispered. Then break my wife's seal and you will know." The second thing in the box was small, and light and folded, and sealed with a rose pressed into faded blue wax. A dead mother's handwriting, 15 years old, never read by any living soul. The Duke of Weston held it in his open palm as if it were a beating heart and said, very quietly, "Send for a magistrate, 2 physicians of standing, and a fast coach. We go to Harrogate." They came for Charlotte on the 17th day, in the hour before noon. The matron was in a flutter, the corridor was full of boots and voices, and Charlotte, summoned without explanation to the visiting room, stopped dead in the doorway because the little room was crowded with faces. A magistrate in black, 2 grave physicians, poor Grimsby grey as his coat, Lady Margaret gripping a handkerchief, Dr. Prout sweating for the first time in his mild grey life. And by the window, turning at the sound of her step, a tall man whose storm-grey eyes went over her, the wrong dress, the thin face, the 17 days with something in them that made her throat close. "Forgive me," said the Duke of Weston, and his voice, that flat, calm voice, was not quite steady. "I was 11 days too slow. It will not happen again in my lifetime." He did not embrace her. There were magistrates watching, and matters of state upon the table. But what passed between them across that little room did not need arms. "Miss," said the magistrate gently, Miss Asterisk, plain and neutral, the first man in weeks to give her no name at all and therefore steal none, "we are here upon a strange business, and I will not pretend otherwise. On this table lies a letter from the late Mr. Ashford of Ashford Hall, and with it a paper sealed by his late wife which no person living has read. The letter instructs us to ask you one question. Take your time. There is no punishment for silence. He folded his hands. What did your mother whisper to you at her bedside 15 years ago? The room went absolutely still. And Charlotte, who had lost her home, her name, her fiancé, and 17 days of her life, stood in her gray asylum dress and felt the years fall open like a door. The lamplit bedroom, the smell of lavender and medicine, the thin arms pulling her clothes, her mother's lips against her hair. Say it back to me now, and then never say it aloud again. She had kept the promise for 15 years. She broke it now, weeping, in a voice that carried to every corner of the silent room. You came into this world holding your sister's hand. Never let go, even if she does. The magistrate looked at the Duke. The Duke looked at the sealed paper, and Lady Margaret took it up with shaking fingers and broke a dead mother's rose-stamped wax, 15 years after it was pressed. She unfolded the little page. She read it, and the old woman lifted her eyes, streaming, and turned the paper for the whole room to see, one faded line in a graceful, failing hand. You came into this world holding your sister's hand. Never let go, even if she does. For a moment, nobody breathed. Then the magistrate rose to his feet and bowed to a woman in a gray wool dress as if she were a queen. Miss Charlotte Ashford, he said, on behalf of the law which has been made a fool of, welcome back. What followed was a storm. Papers torn, papers signed, Dr. Prout babbling about signatures given in good faith while the magistrate looked at him, the way one looks at something on a boot heel. But the Duke had gone to the window, and the Duke was looking at the sun, and the sun stood near noon, and it was Lady Margaret who suddenly gasped, remembering the news that had met them at the Harrogate in that morning, the gossip running ahead of them down every road in the county. The wedding of Mr. Edmund Blake and Miss Charlotte Ashford had been moved forward once again. Not to next week, not to tomorrow. To asterisk this morning, 11 o'clock, at the chapel of Ashford Hall, 40 miles away. She knows, the Duke said softly to the glass. Somehow the little serpent knows we found him. He turned from the window and Charlotte saw his face, and her heart dropped through the floor. The moment that register is signed, the fortune passes to Blake, and what she stole in 6 months will take 10 years of courts to claw back, if it can be done at all. It is 11:15 now asterisk. Then it's finished, whispered Grimsby. No coach on earth does 40 miles in. A wedding is not a race, Mr. Grimsby. It is a asterisk ceremony asterisk, the Duke said, already moving, already pulling open the door and shouting for the horses. Banns, prayers, sermon, vows, a proud woman does not gallop through her own coronation. She will stretch it. She will glitter in it. She has perhaps an hour of glittering left, and the Vicar of Ashford is famously long-winded. He turned in the doorway and held out his hand to Charlotte, bare, ungloved, the hand of the boy from the fair. Well, Miss Ashford, they are reading the banns in your name. Shall we go and answer them? Charlotte Ashford looked down at her gray asylum dress. Then she took his hand. Drive fast, she said. The chapel of Ashford Hall had never held so many people, or so much silk. 200 guests, the cream of 3 counties, packed the old stone pews, and at the altar, in a cloud of white lace and orange blossom, stood the most beautiful bride any of them had ever seen. She glittered. She glowed. And just as a certain duke had predicted, 40 miles away, she was in no hurry at all. The bride had asked for the full service, every psalm, every prayer. The Vicar of Ashford, a man who had never met a sentence he could not lengthen, was deep into his address on the sacred duties of marriage, and the bride listened with her lovely head tilted, drinking the morning like wine. This was her coronation. She had planned it for a year, lied for it, forged for it, buried her own sister alive for it, and she intended to taste every minute. Beside her, the bridegroom was not tasting anything. Edmund Blake stood at the altar with the face of a man at his own trial. He had barely slept in a fortnight. 3 times that morning he had glanced back at the chapel doors. There had been rumors in the village since dawn: a fire, a lawyer, riders on the London road, and Edmund, who owed money to men who did not forgive, had learned to fear rumors the way sailors fear weather. And therefore, the vicar rolled on, arriving at last, magnificently at the ancient words, "If any man can show just cause why they may not lawfully be joined together, let him now speak." The doors of the chapel opened. Not with a bang. That was the strange thing, the thing 200 witnesses would tell and retell for 30 years. The great oak doors simply swung wide, letting in a flood of cold October light, and in that light stood a tall man in black, and on his arm a woman. The woman wore no silk. She wore a plain dress of asylum gray, and her dark hair was loose about her shoulders, and she was thin and pale, and she walked up the aisle of her mother's church with her head high, and pew by pew, face by face, the congregation turned and saw her and stopped breathing, because her face was standing at the altar in white lace. The scream of whispers rose like startled birds. Guests half stood. An old countess dropped her prayer book, and down the aisle they came, unhurried, terrible. The Duke of Weston, whom nobody had seen at a wedding in living memory, a magistrate in black, 2 physicians, old Grimsby the lawyer, gray but steady now, a small round noblewoman with fire in her eye, and helped along by a footman, weeping into her Sunday shawl, an old nurse that half the village knew on sight. The vicar's mouth opened and closed. The bride had turned. And for one raw, endless moment in front of God and 200 guests, the 2 faces looked at each other down the length of the aisle, one framed in bridal lace, one in asylum gray. Identical, utterly identical. Eyes, mouths, brows, a single face, doubled, staring at itself across their mother's gravestones in the chapel floor. The silence broke like glass. "Cecily!" The bride's cry rang to the rafters, perfect, heartbreaking, a masterpiece, her hand flying to her breast, her eyes brimming on command. "Oh, oh no, my darling, how did you get asterisk out? Someone help her, please, she is not well, my poor sister is asterisk not well." She turned, trembling, to the frozen congregation, to the vicar, to anyone. "Forgive us, you see now the sorrow this family carries. Dr. Prout was to keep her safe. She must have. Oh, this is asterisk my fault asterisk, I should never have." It was flawless. It was her finest performance. Half the chapel was already softening toward her, already murmuring, "The poor bride, the mad sister, what a tragedy." "Madam," one word from the man in black beside the magistrate, and it fell across the chapel like a headsman's axe. The Duke of Weston did not raise his voice. He had never needed to. "You are addressing my future wife. Choose your next words with very great care." The murmur died. 200 heads swung back. The Duke of Weston, the recluse, betrothed. "Sir Henry," the Duke said, "if you would." The magistrate stepped forward and opened his leather case, and the law began to speak in the house of God. He told it all plainly, dryly, and the dryness made it more terrible. The letter of the late Mr. Ashford, recovered under seal from his London bank, testifying against his own daughter in a dead man's hand. The forged summons to a dying aunt. The dismissed servants. The committal papers sworn against the wrong twin. And the test, the mother's sealed words, 15 years unopened, matched syllable for syllable that very morning before witnesses, by the woman in gray. "The law is satisfied," Sir Henry finished, into a silence so deep the candles could be heard burning, "as to which of these 2 ladies is Miss Charlotte Ashford, and it is not the lady in the veil." Uproar. The vicar clutched the altar rail. Nanny Hale sobbed openly. And the bride stood very still in her cloud of white, and those who were closest saw her eyes move quick, left and right, a gambler counting the last cards in a lost deck. Deny it, her father's letter. Claim the test was fraud. Grimsby, the magistrate, the physicians. Weep, faint, run. She was still counting when the man beside her broke. I want it known. Edmund Blake's voice cracked across the chapel, too loud, too shrill, and every eye jumped to the bridegroom who had gone the color of the altar cloth. I want it clearly known that I was deceived. I believed this woman to be Charlotte. I had no idea, no possible way of. Mr. Blake. The Duke turned to him at last slowly, and there was something in his face that made the nearest guests lean away. I hoped you would speak. I have brought some of your correspondence. From his coat he drew a thin bundle of letters, cheap paper, wine-ringed, creased, and weighed them in his hand. 11 days ago I was in London, Mr. Blake, and London, you'll be sorry to hear, is full of your creditors, grasping men, impatient men, men who were delighted for a price to sell every scrap of paper bearing your signature. He drew out one letter, unfolded it without hurry. This one is addressed to a moneylender in Jermyn Street. It is dated the 4th of March, 6 weeks, please note, asterisk before the forged letter that lured Miss Ashford north. Shall I read it to your wedding guests, or will you? Edmund's mouth moved. Nothing came out. Be patient a few months longer, the Duke read, and his flat, carrying voice reached the last pew, and you shall have every penny with interest. By spring I marry the Ashford fortune, and between us, sir, it does not matter a straw to me which sister wears the veil. The chapel gasped as one body. Charlotte closed her eyes. There it was spoken aloud at last in his own hand, the truth she had understood on a rainy doorstep and had never let herself say. He had never loved her. There had never been anything to love her with. 3 years, a ring, a rose garden, and to him, she and her sister had been one interchangeable purse. It was her. And now Edmund came apart entirely in front of everyone, pointing at his own bride with a shaking hand, the words tumbling and shrieking over each other. It was her idea, all of it from the first. She came to me last winter, she came to me. She knew about my debts. She said Charlotte had the fortune and Charlotte was soft. And if I helped her, if I kept silent and courted them both as one woman. The letter to the aunt was her writing, but the scheme, the timing, the servants, the asylum, hers, all hers, I swear it before God. I only did what she, his voice splintered. She forced me. You poor, weak, greedy little man, said the bride. She said it quietly, almost kindly, and the strange, cold calm of it silenced the chapel faster than any scream. Cecily Ashford stood at the altar amid the wreck of everything, her groom babbling, her guests recoiling, her sister risen from the grave she dug, her father's letter testifying from the actual grave, the law and a duke arrayed against her, every lie stripped away and 30 years of consequences roaring toward her. And she did something that no one, not the duke, not the magistrate, not even Charlotte, who had shared a face with her since before they were born, expected her to do. She began, very softly, to applaud. Slowly, deliberately, her white-gloved hands coming together in the enormous silence once, twice, 3 times, while her gaze traveled around the chapel, over the magistrates and the physicians and the letters and the appalled, avid faces of society, and came to rest, at last, on the woman in asylum gray. Well played, Lottie, she said. Papa always said you were the good one. She reached up with both hands and lifted the bridal veil from her head and let it fall to the chapel floor like a shed skin. So before they take me away, shall I tell them all what being the other one was like? And what Cecily Ashford said next, no one in that chapel would forget for the rest of their lives. No one stopped her. Perhaps they should have, the magistrate had every right, and Dr. Prout would certainly have called it a symptom. But there are moments when even the law holds its breath, and this was one of them. A bride in a ruined wedding, standing over her fallen veil, addressing 200 people who had come for a marriage and were about to witness a confession. I was born 11 minutes after her, Cecily said. 11 minutes, that is the whole of my inheritance. Her voice was quiet and clear, and it did not tremble at all, and somehow that was worse than any weeping. You are all looking from her face to mine and asking yourselves how anyone could do what I have done. Let me save you the trouble. Imagine, if you can, being a copy. Not a sister, a asterisk copy asterisk. Imagine that every person who ever smiled at you performed one small motion first here. She touched the corner of her own eye lightly. A flicker, a check. Which one is this? My whole life no one ever simply looked at me. They verified me. My governess, the servants, the vicar. My own father. Her gaze found Charlotte standing gray and still in the aisle. He loved you the way the sun shines, Lottie, without trying, without stopping. And he was fair to me and kind to me and careful with me, the way one is careful with a debt. Children know the difference. Children know it before they know words. Cecily, Charlotte began. I'm not finished. Still quiet, still terribly calm. You all heard about the famous locket this morning, the test, the secret our sainted mother whispered. Something moved across her face then, the first crack in it, quickly mastered. Shall I tell you where I was while that secret was being whispered? I was 8 years old and I was standing in the corridor outside Mama's door because she had sent for Charlotte. Alone. Her last month on this earth, her strength going candle by candle, and she spent it making a lock, and my sister was the key, and I, the crack opened just for a syllable. I was what the lock was built against. 8 years old. She knew me before I knew myself. You may all decide whether that is a mother's wisdom or a mother's curse, because I never could. The chapel was silent as the gravestones in its floor. Somewhere in a pew, a woman was quietly crying, and it was not for the bride's ruined wedding. So yes, Cecily lifted her chin and the mask came back, but everyone had seen behind it now, and a mask that has been seen behind is only a face. Yes, I took it. The name, the house, the money, the wedding, I took the whole shining life that was always 11 minutes out of my reach, and do you know what I found inside it? She laughed, one small, cold note. Nothing. It was empty, Lottie. Your Edmund courted asterisk your face for 3 years and never once saw you, I know, because he never saw me either and I was watching for it. The servants bowed to your name, not to you. Society embraced your fortune. I sat in your chair in your silk wearing your ring and I waited to feel loved at last and I felt nothing at all because there was nothing there. Even with your face no one loved me, not even your fiancé. They only ever loved the money. She looked down at her white gloves. The only person who was ever loved in this story, sister, was you. And you were loved by the 2 dead people in this floor and by an old woman in that pew and apparently, her eyes went briefly, unreadably to the Duke, by a man who can tell us apart in the rain. That is more love than most people are given in a lifetime. I stole everything you had, Lottie. I could not steal asterisk that asterisk. It turns out that was the fortune. And then, with 200 pairs of eyes upon her, Cecily Ashford did her last unexpected thing of the day. She reached down, picked her veil up off the chapel floor, folded it neatly, laid it across the altar rail like a settled bill, and turned to the magistrate. I believe, Sir Henry, she said, that you have papers for me to sign. I'll want nothing. I'll contest nothing. Let's not be tedious about it. The reckoning, when it came, was swift, and it was not Charlotte's doing, though the county talked of little else all winter. Edmund Blake did not stay for the reckoning at all. He slipped out of the chapel during the confession, white and sweating, and was on the Dover road by nightfall, because the Duke of Weston, with the cruelest courtesy imaginable, had simply returned his purchased debts to the moneylenders of Jermyn Street that same afternoon, with a short note observing that Mr. Blake's expected fortune had asterisk fallen through asterisk. What the courts would have done to Edmund was nothing beside what his creditors intended, and he knew it. He was last heard of in Calais, giving dancing lessons under a false name, forever glancing at doors. He had wanted money without love. He ended with neither, in a country where no one checked which sister he was mourning, because no one asked about him at all. Dr. Josiah Prout lost his license by spring, when the magistrate's report reached London. The Harrogate Asylum passed to a board of physicians who began, cautiously, to ask their patients questions and to write down the answers. And Cecily signed everything. Renunciations, confessions, restorations, page after page in that elegant, slanted hand that had done so much harm, now undoing it stroke by stroke. The law could have asked for prison. Charlotte stood in the magistrate's chamber with every power in her hands at last, and asked instead for exile, and no one who saw her face dared call it weakness. "You came into the world holding her hand," Nanny Hale said quietly that evening. "I know," said Charlotte, "I was there." Ashford Hall came back to life, the way a garden does, not all at once, but window by window. Mrs. Finch was found keeping house in Shropshire and returned at a run. Old Peter came back to his stables and wept on the neck of every horse in turn. Nanny Hale was installed in the warmest room in the south wing, protesting magnificently, and ruled the household within a week. The new butler, Marsh, was kept on. Charlotte would not punish a man for believing a lie the whole county had believed, and he served her ever after with the particular devotion of the justly forgiven. And on the first mild day of spring, in the rose garden where 3 years earlier a hollow man had dropped a ring in the grass, Charlotte Ashford walked with the Duke of Weston. They had walked a great deal that winter. Propriety was satisfied. Lady Margaret trailed them at 40 yards, ferociously pretending to study birds, and the county had long since stopped being surprised. But today the Duke was quiet even by his own standards, and at the turn of the path he stopped and looked at his gloves, and then took them off altogether, which for Nathaniel Weston was very nearly a speech. "I have faced down magistrates, moneylenders, and your sister," he said. "I find this considerably worse." "Your Grace." "Nathaniel, you've earned it 11 times over." He turned to face her, barehanded in the spring light, and the storm-gray eyes were not cold at all now. They had never been cold, she knew that now. They had only been waiting. "Charlotte, on the day we met, the second time we met, you asked me a question in my carriage, and I gave you half an answer. You asked how I knew you, how I could possibly be certain when your own people were not." He took a breath. "Here is the whole answer and my question with it. The world tells sisters like you apart by tests and lockets and letters because the world looks at faces. I never had that problem. You are not, and have never been, one of 2 identical women. You are the girl who ruined a white dress in the mud for a stranger and forgot it by supper. You are the woman who walked out of an asylum and asked for mercy for her jailer. There is exactly one of you, Charlotte Ashford. Anyone who has truly seen you once could never, not for a heartbeat, not in the rain, not in the dark, mistake you for any other face on this earth." He held out his open hand, palm up, the hand of a boy from a summer fair, holding an invisible cap. "I have known you for 11 years and loved you for every one of them. Marry me." Charlotte looked at the open hand. Then she reached into her pocket and took out a small, folded square of white, the corner of her handkerchief, and laid it in his palm, and closed his fingers over it, the way a girl had once handed back a cap at a fair. "It's a very fine coat," she said through her tears. "I hope your day mends, sir." And the Duke of Weston, the cold Duke, the recluse, the man the county swore had never once smiled in public, threw back his head in the middle of the rose garden and laughed, until the birds startled up out of the hedges, and Lady Margaret, 40 yards away, abandoned ornithology forever and came running. The wedding was in June, in the chapel at Ashford Hall because, as Charlotte said, a house is not healed until it has held something joyful, with Nanny Hale weeping in the front pew, Grimsby beaming over the register he had, this once triple-checked, and the whole village crowding the doors. And if, at the edge of the churchyard, a plain hired carriage stood for a little while that morning, and if a woman in a plain traveling dress watched from behind its curtain as the bells rang, and pressed her gloved hand once, briefly, against the glass before the carriage rolled quietly away toward the coast, well, Only one person in England could have said for certain who she was. And that person, standing radiant in the chapel doorway in her wedding lace, lifted her hand toward the departing carriage and held it there open until the road was empty. Never let go, even if she does. 1 year later, if you had stood at the gates of Ashford Hall on a certain June morning, 1 year after the wedding, you would never have believed what those old stones had seen. The windows stood open to the summer, every one of them, and the smell of cut grass and baking bread drifted down the drive. In the stable yard, old Peter was teaching a village boy to braid a mane, swearing gently at him in the way that meant affection. Mrs. Finch could be heard through the kitchen windows, conducting the household like an orchestra. And from the nursery on the south front, the warmest room but one in the house, came the sound that had changed everything. The small, imperious, entirely wonderful sound of a month-old baby demanding the world's attention. She got it. She always got it. She was, after all, the granddaughter of 2 people buried in the chapel floor, the daughter of a duchess who had come back from the dead, and the tyrant-in-chief of a duke whom half of England still believed incapable of smiling. Half of England was badly out of date. The Duke of Weston, that cold man, that recluse, that famous fortress, could be found most mornings in the nursery in his shirt-sleeves, holding his daughter with the extreme, wide-eyed caution of a man carrying lit gunpowder, while Nanny Hale supervised from her chair by the window like an old general who had come out of retirement for one last, greatest campaign. "You'll not break her, your grace," Nanny would say for the 100th time. "You cannot know that," the Duke would reply, for the 100th time, not taking his eyes off the small, sleeping face. "She is the only one of her in existence." And Charlotte, Duchess of Weston, standing in the doorway with the sun on her back, would look at the 3 of them, the old woman who had raised her, the man who had found her in the rain, the daughter asleep in his careful arms, and feel her heart do the thing it did a dozen times a day now. Swell, and ache and overflow all at once, like a cup held under a running spring. She had 2 great houses now, a husband, a child, a name restored, a fortune recovered, and a county that had transferred its whole terrified respect for the Duke into a warm, gossiping adoration of his Duchess. She had everything. Everything except one thing, and that one thing was the reason that, on this particular June morning, there was a letter lying unfinished on the desk in her private sitting room, as there had been, one way or another, for a year. The world, of course, had spent that year tidying up the story to its own satisfaction, the way the world always does. Edmund Blake had become a cautionary tale told at club windows, last reliably seen in Calais, then in Brussels, then, according to a traveling wine merchant in a shabby spa town in the German states, teaching English and dancing to the daughters of people who did not ask questions, under a name that was not his own. There was a certain justice in that, the clubmen agreed. The man who could not tell one sister from another had ended as a man nobody could quite place, in a country where nobody tried. His creditors had given up the chase as unprofitable. His name, in the county where he had been handsome and golden and sure of himself, was now used mostly by mothers as a warning. Dr. Josiah Prout had lost his license by February. The Harrogate Asylum stood under new governors, and because a certain duchess had taken a certain interest under new rules. There was a fund now, quietly endowed, ferociously administered by Lady Margaret, that paid for independent physicians to review the case of any woman confined on the word of her own family. It was called simply the Ashford Fund. In its first year it had opened 11 locked doors. Charlotte kept the gray asylum dress, washed and folded, in the bottom of her wardrobe, and when Lady Margaret asked her why in heaven's name she did not burn the wretched thing, Charlotte had answered, "Because on the day I stop being able to look at it, I will stop remembering that the 11 were real." Old Grimsby had aged backward a decade. Restored, forgiven, and utterly reformed in his habits, he now kept every document of consequence in triplicate, one copy in Milbourne, one in London, and one, he freely admitted, in a place he would tell no living soul, not even your grace, begging your grace's pardon, for that is the entire point of it. He had stood godfather-in-law, so to speak, to the marriage settlement, and had wept over the register at the wedding, and had developed in his old age the single vanity of telling the story of the sealed blue paper to anyone who would sit still for it. And in all that year, through the wedding, through the restoration, through the winter, through the birth from a convent school on a Tuscan hillside, there had come nothing. Charlotte had written 12 letters to Italy, one a month, like the payment of a debt only she could see. She told her sister small things, that old Peter's gray mare had foaled, that Nanny Hale ruled the south wing, that the Roses had done well, that she was married, that she was happy, that she was with child. She asked for nothing. She accused nothing. She signed each one the same way, your sister, Lottie, and each one dropped into the silence of the south and vanished like a stone into deep water. No reply ever came. What came instead, twice that year, were letters from the Reverend Mother of the Convent of Santa Chiara, written in careful, formal English, in answer to the single anxious inquiry Charlotte had permitted herself. And from those 2 letters Charlotte had assembled, the way one assembles a mosaic from a handful of tiles, a picture of her sister's life. The Signorina Inglese had arrived with one trunk and had asked for work, not charity. She taught the orphan girls of the school. She taught them English and arithmetic, and the Reverend Mother noted this with particular warmth of penmanship, at which she was said to be the finest teacher in the province. The Signorina's hand is a wonder, the old nun wrote, elegant and exact. She tells the children that a person's writing is a promise and must never be used to deceive, and the children mind her, for she is strict. They are a little afraid of her, and they love her greatly in the way of children who can always do both at once. Charlotte had put that letter down and cried for an hour. The forger's hand, the beautiful, slanted, terrible hand that had written a dying aunt into existence and a living sister into a madhouse, spent its days now closed around the small fingers of orphans, teaching them that writing was a promise. And there was one more tile in the mosaic from the second letter, small and strange and shining. You ask how your sister does. She is well. She dresses always in gray, though the sisters have told her there is no requirement. When Sister Agnès asked her why, the Signorina said only, "It is the color of debts." We do not press her. God speaks to each soul in its own tongue. Gray, the color Cecily had mocked across a scarred asylum table, asterisk gray suits us, who knew. Chosen now, freely, morning after morning, on a sunlit hillside where no one required it. It was after that letter that Charlotte had begun, and abandoned and begun again, the 13th letter, the one that was different, the one that still lay unfinished on her desk. Because by then she knew what she wanted to put in it, and it frightened her. The argument, the only real argument of her marriage's first year, had happened in April, in the last month of her confinement, in the blue sitting room with the rain on the windows. No, Nathaniel had said, flatly, in the old voice, the one the county feared. Forgive me, no. Nathaniel. She put you in an asylum, Charlotte. He had crossed to the window, his back rigid. I stood in that visiting room and I saw what 17 days of it had done to you, and I have not slept a full night since without seeing it. She took your name, your home, your father's grave from you. She would have taken your life by inches in a gray dress and called it sisterly sorrow at dinner parties. And you wish to give our daughter that woman's name. Yes. In God's name, why? And Charlotte had sat quietly with her hands on the great curve of her belly and waited until he turned around, because this needed his eyes. Because my mother saw it coming, she said, all of it. 15 years ago dying, she looked at her two little girls and she saw the crack running down the middle of our family, and she did the only thing she could do from a deathbed. She gave me one sentence to carry. Not a weapon, Nathaniel. Everyone thinks it was a weapon, the test, the proof, the trap that caught the false twin. But you have read the words. You came into this world holding your sister's hand. Never let go, even if she does. That is not a lock, my love. It only worked as one. It is an asterisk instruction. Her voice had wavered then and steadied. Cecily let go, long before I ever knew it. As a child in a corridor outside a dying woman's door, she let go and nobody noticed, and she fell for 20 years. And everyone in her life did exactly what the world does with people who fall. They verified her. They managed her. They were asterisk careful with her. I am the only person left alive who is allowed to do something different, because I am the only one my mother gave the instruction to. She had held out her hand, and after a moment he had crossed the room and taken it. I cannot pardon what she did. The law has done its work and I would not undo it. But a name is not a pardon, Nathaniel. A name is a hand held open. I want our daughter to grow up knowing that in this family we do not let go of people, even the ones who let go of us. Especially those. And I want my sister in a gray dress on a hillside 1,000 miles away to learn one morning that somewhere in England there is a little girl called Cecily, and that her name was given, not taken. There had been a long silence, with the rain on the glass. You are aware, the Duke had said at last, in a voice not entirely under his command, that I built 30 years of defenses, and you walk through them as if they were garden gates. I ruined a very good dress learning how, said Charlotte. The baby was born in May, after a long night during which the Duke of Weston wore a path in the gallery carpet that the housemaid swore was visible ever after. She arrived at dawn, red-faced and furious, with her mother's dark hair, and Nanny Hale announced it before the child was 10 minutes old, with the authority of 60 years. Her grandfather's chin, God rest him, and heaven help us all. They christened her Cecily Rose. Cecily, for the reasons only the family fully understood. Rose, for a seal pressed into faded blue wax by a dying hand, 15 years before, on a folded scrap of paper that now lived, with 2 locks of newborn hair and a third one newly added, inside a small gold locket that the Duchess of Weston wore every day of her life, and never took off, even in sleep. And when the christening was set for September in the chapel at Ashford Hall, Charlotte went up to her sitting room and took out the 13th letter, and this time she did not stop. Ashford Hall, June the 19th asterisk. My dear Cecily asterisk. This is the 13th letter I have written you, and I know now that you have read the other 12. I know because the Reverend Mother, who is a truthful woman, wrote to me that the Signorina Inglese keeps a wooden box on the shelf above her bed, and that it is opened and closed on the 1st of every month. You never were careless with things that mattered. It was one of the 1,000 ways Papa could not tell, and I could not tell, how much you were hurting. You kept everything so beautifully. I am not writing to speak of what happened. The law has spoken of it, and the county has spoken of it endlessly, and I find I have nothing to add to either. I am writing to tell you 3 things and to ask you one. The first thing is that I was there in the chapel when you told them what it was to be a copy. I have thought of it every day for a year. I want you to know that I believe you, not as one believes a defense, as one believes a map. You showed me the country you had been living in all our lives, 11 minutes wide and cold as January, and I saw that I had been standing next to it since before we were born and had never once truly looked at it. For that blindness of mine, not for anything else, for I owe no other apology, and you would despise me if I offered one. I am sorry, Sissy. I called you that until we were 6, do you remember? And then a governess said it was babyish, and I stopped. I am starting again. The second thing is that Mama saw you. I know you stood in the corridor. I know what you think that door meant. But you only heard that she gave me a secret. You never learned what the secret said. It said, you came into this world holding your sister's hand. Never let go even if she does. Read it again, sissy. Read it as a teacher of penmanship who tells her children that writing is a promise. It is one sentence and every word of it is about you. She did not spend her last strength building a lock against her broken daughter. She spent it binding her whole daughter to her broken one with the only rope she had. You were not what the lock was built against. You were what the rope was tied to. She knew you would let go. She was your mother. She had seen your eyes go cold at 8 years old, and it must have frightened her more than dying. So she made me promise to hold on for us both. I have kept the promise badly and lost you for 20 years, and found the letter of it only in a magistrate's office. I mean to keep the spirit of it now. The third thing is that on the 10th of May at 6 o'clock in the morning I had a daughter. She is loud and stubborn and beautiful, and Nanny Hale, who is well, and who rules this house, and who prays for you at chapel every Sunday by name, out loud, daring anyone to remark on it, says she has Papa's chin. We christen her in September in Mama's chapel. We have named her Cecily. I will not pretend my husband found this easy, and I will not insult you by pretending it was nothing. It was not nothing. It was everything I have. It is a hand held open, sissy, held out across 1,000 miles and 20 years and all of it. Everything held open in a rose garden gone quiet, the way yours was held open to me once across a font, when we were an hour old and did not yet know we were two people. Now the question. It is a small one, as the largest questions always are. Come and see your niece. Come to the christening, or come after, or come in a year. The door does not close. It is not that kind of door anymore. I have had all the locks in this family taken off. Come in your gray dress. You will find I keep one too. No one will verify you at my gate, sissy. No one will check. There is exactly one of you in existence, and there is one person left in the world who has always been able to tell, and she is asking you to come home. Your sister, who was there when you arrived, holding on. Lottie. The letter went south with the July post, and the summer closed over its wake, and Charlotte made herself stop counting the days and failed and counted them. July gave no answer. August gave no answer. Lady Margaret took to lingering by the hall table when the post came in, ferociously pretending to sort invitations. Even the Duke, who had said once quietly, "She will not answer, my love. Some people cannot bear to be forgiven. It is the one weight they never learn to carry." Even the Duke was seen to glance at the silver tray. And then, on the 3rd of September, 5 days before the christening, among the bills and the invitations and a wine merchant's catalog, there lay a small envelope of cheap Italian paper, addressed in a hand that made Charlotte's heart stop in the middle of the entrance hall. Elegant, slanted, the most careful handwriting in the province. She carried it out to the rose garden to open it. She could not have said why, except that some letters need sky. Her hand shook so badly at the seal that she laughed at herself, and the laugh came out as something else. Nathaniel, watching from the terrace, did not follow. Some doors a husband guards from the outside. Inside the envelope there was no letter. There was a single strip of paper, cut with scissors, perfectly straight, the economy of a woman who wasted nothing now, not paper, not words, not chances. On it one line, no greeting, no signature. 15 words in that beautiful, exact, promise-keeping hand. If there is anyone left on this earth who could still recognize me, it is you. Charlotte, Duchess of Weston, stood in the rose garden with 15 words in her 2 hands, and wept as she had not wept since a magistrate asked her what her mother whispered. And if you had asked her, she could not have told you whether it was grief or joy, because it was that rarest weather of the heart, when both fall at once. Because it was not a yes. But oh, it was not a no. The christening of Cecily Rose on the 8th of September was the kind of day the county talks about for a generation. Gold light, full pews, the bells of Ashford Chapel ringing over the stubble fields, and a baby who screamed through the entire sacrament with such magnificent fury that the vicar remarked She was clearly opposed to sin in all its forms. It was Nanny Hale. Of course it was Nanny Hale, whose old eyes had never once in 60 years been wrong about that family, who saw it first, from her seat of honor by the chapel door. A plain hired carriage stopped at the far end of the churchyard lane, where the yew trees made their shadow, stopped and staying. And a woman standing beside it, too far to call to, close enough to see. She wore gray. The bells were still ringing. The guests were still streaming out into the gold light, laughing, clustering around the furious guest of honor. And Charlotte, coming out of the chapel door with her daughter in her arms, followed old Nanny's frozen gaze down the lane, and the whole shining day went silent around her, the way the world goes silent for only one face. Her own face, thinner, browner from a southern sun, 20 yards and 20 years away, half in the shadow of the yews, standing very still, the way a woman stands at a door she does not believe she is allowed to knock on. Afterward, no one could agree how long the two of them stood looking at each other across the churchyard. Lady Margaret said a full minute. The vicar said 10 seconds. Nanny Hale said it was 20 years, and she was the only one who was right. It was the baby who ended it. Cecily rose, outraged afresh by the general stillness, loosed a cry that scattered the rooks from the tower, and down the lane, the woman in gray, entirely against her own will, in the way these things ambush the body before the heart has voted, smiled. And Charlotte did not decide anything. Her feet decided. She walked down the churchyard path with her daughter in her arms, past the frozen guests, past her husband, who took one step to follow, and then, because he was the only man in England who could tell them apart and therefore the only one who truly understood, stood still and let her go down the lane into the shadow of the yews, and stopped an arm's length from the sister who had taken everything from her, and held out the one thing that could not be taken. The baby. "Sissy," said Charlotte, "this is Cecily." For a long moment the woman in gray did not move. Her eyes went from the child's face to her sister's and back, and there was no flicker in them, no check, no verifying, because between these two there had never once needed to be. And then, slowly, as if reaching across a distance far greater than an arm's length, she put out one finger, work-roughened now, ink-stained at the knuckle from 1,000 penmanship lessons, and touched the baby's open hand. And Cecily Rose Weston, 1 month old, tyrant of the South Nursery, seized her aunt's finger in a grip like a blacksmith's, and did not let go. The gray shoulders began, very quietly, to shake. "She has," Cecily's voice came out broken to pieces, "she has Papa's chin. Nanny says heaven help us all." "Nanny," said Cecily Ashford, weeping now openly in the shadow of the yews, held fast by a fist the size of a walnut, "is never wrong." They stood there together, the two of them and the third, until the bells finished ringing. And what was said after that, in the lane under the yew trees, belonged to no one but two sisters and a God who had waited 20 years to hear it, though Lady Margaret always swore she saw, before the guests were shepherded decently away, the moment the Duchess of Weston reached out and took her sister's hand, the hand she had been born holding. And this time no one let go. So the story ends the way the oldest stories do, not with the punishment, though there was punishment, not even with the wedding, though there was a wedding, but with a door left open, and a name given instead of taken, and one line of a dead mother's handwriting, kept and honored on both sides of the sea. Cecily did not stay that first time. She returned to her hillside and her orphans, because debts, as she said, are paid in the color gray, one morning at a time. But she came again at Christmas, and the Christmas after, and the summer after that, teaching her niece over the vigorous objections of Nanny Hale, who held that 3 was too young for such things, the first careful strokes of the most beautiful penmanship in 2 countries, and telling her sternly, while the child's whole fist gripped the pen, "Remember, little one, a person's writing is a promise." And in the great house above them, in a locket of old gold, 3 curls of hair lay folded around a strip of paper worn soft at the creases. A mother's last sentence, which had turned out in the end to be true twice over. You came into this world holding your sister's hand. Never let go, even if she does. Because sometimes, not always, dear listener, but sometimes, and it is worth everything to know it, the ones who let go come back down a churchyard lane in a gray dress, 20 years late, and find a hand still open. Thank you for listening to the story all the way to the end. Please tell us which city you're watching from and what the story made you feel. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss new stories.